What's happening, everybody? Literally, I just finished teaching class literally seconds ago. That's why I was a little late getting on this morning or tonight. Oh, man. It was a Pacific Standard class, so it's 3 hours behind normally everybody else. We went right up 5:57 was when I logged out of that, and I already put it in here. So, whew. Lots of work. So, how is everybody tonight? Let me know in the chat box who's here. Who is visiting with us tonight? I see we have several people on LinkedIn, several people on YouTube, right? And so let us know. Hey, got to start every show with this. What are you drinking tonight? Yes, what are you drinking tonight? It's after hours. You can drink anything you want, but I just finished teaching. So this is a mixture of Zevia root beer and water. What are you drinking tonight? Let me know, especially if it's something good, right? So this is this show where we answer your questions. Hello, Aaron. Good to see you, buddy. Where we answer your questions. I do have some questions that were submitted to me ahead of time. So we'll go through those and we'll just kind of move on from there. So, yes, absolutely. Shotzi's in the house. Diet Dr. Pepper as usual, probably from a 2-liter bottle. If I know Shotzi, if I know him at all, he loves his Diet Dr. Pepper. He does. Before we get into the question portions of stuff tonight, why is this thing always doing this to me? There we go. Close. There we go. Before we get into the question portion, the one thing I want to mention, I was on LinkedIn and I was floating around doing something or another, and I saw a real interesting post from Low Voltage Nation. So Low Voltage Nation, I don't know if you know Blake, he runs Low Voltage Nation over there, and he spent an hour on the phone with FOA, Fiber Optic Association. If you don't know them, they do training. They do the Certified Fiber Optic Technician Certificate, the CFOT. And so Blake did a post on that, and he said that they're working on something to help them with Low Voltage Nation, and that they're going to sponsor 6 scholarships. 6 scholarships. Isn't that cool? So if you're not a member of Low Voltage Nation, look them up. Okay? Because you might get one of those free scholarships, right? Who doesn't want free training? I do. I want free training. And I actually had to talk to the guy who runs FOA today. I talked to him via chat on LinkedIn. And the reason I did is because I got a question, and this, you may not know this about me, but for some reason, I get a lot of people send me friend requests on LinkedIn from the Middle East, from Egypt and Saudi Arabia and all those places. I'm not sure why I'm so big over there, but I get lots of them. And I had gotten a question today. I'd received a question today. And the question was a response to that post I was just telling you about, the FOA post. And so I replied back on Blake's post. That's really cool. So I got a question from one of my audience members in Egypt, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing it, this is not exactly how he worded it, but he said basically he is an RCDD now, and he's looking to get his fiber optic certification. And he asked me, which did I feel was better, the Bixie fiber certification or the FOA fiber certification? And the interesting thing there is, my boss is from the U.S., but he spent many years in Dubai. So I actually reached out to him. And here's my point. Because I can't really tell him which is better for him in Egypt because I've never done work in Egypt, right? I can't. Hello, Fernando. I've never been to Egypt, so I can't really tell him. I've never responded to any bids in Egypt, so I couldn't really tell him. So I reached out to my boss, and I asked my boss, because I knew my boss spent many years out there, and I said, look, I have a friend in Dubai, and he wants to know which is better, the FOA certification or the Bixie fiber certification. Because here's what I break it down. I break it down to there's 2 major areas of concern. name recognition and the quality of the class, right? Name recognition, quality of the class. So for as far as name recognition, and that's why I reached out to my boss, right? Because like I said, he spent many years there. And I asked him, while you were over there, how many bids did you see that said they called out for someone who was Bixby certified or somebody who was FOA certified? And his response was, I can't ever remember seeing FOA in a bid request. Now he said, we used to see Bixby all the time, but I can't recall seeing a FOA. And that was kind of my thought as well. I mean, Bixby has them a name recognition over FOA. I mean, most people have never even heard of FOA. So they have the name recognition, especially in Egypt. When you look at the quality of the two classes, the quality of the installer F and versus the CFOT certification, those are both quality programs. And if you take that class, you're going to learn lots of information. You're going to learn how to terminate fiber, and you're going to learn standards. You're going to learn fiber 101 principles and all that fun stuff. They're both. So I guess what you really got to apply to it, and I guess I'm really saying this towards the guy in Egypt, but this can apply to anybody, whether you're in Spokane, Washington, or Tampa, Florida, right? What's your end goal for that certification? Is your end goal just to get that certification so that way when you respond to bids, you can say, oh yeah, we got X amount of RCDDs on staff. We got X amount of Bixby technicians on staff. Or is it you just want to learn more about that concept, whether it's copper or fiber? Because if it's that, I think the FOA certification might be a little better. Not a whole lot better, but a little bit. Because, like I said, I reached out to FOA because I've known of them, and I'm actually reached out and asked if they want to do an interview on the podcast. And I asked them, I told them exactly what that guy had asked me, and what his response was is he said that the Bixby program is really the RCDD program and for premise cabling, and there is some truth to that. He claims that the FOA program is for all fiber, whether it's cable TV fiber or outside plant fiber or other stuff. So, and I'll find out more about that when I do the interview with him. Although I did do a show on certifications a few months back. But hopefully he'll say yes to the interview, and we'll get him on here and we'll grill him. So if you have questions you want me to ask him, we'll do that as well too. Absolutely. So make sure you send me those questions. So if you just want to learn, and if you're going to be staying just in premise cabling, I would stay with the Bixby certification, because in the U.S., Bixby has that name recognition. FOA does too, to an extent, but not as much as FOA does. So, that was my question to him. So, my answer to him. I hope that answered thoroughly enough for him, because, like I said, I'm not from that part of the world, and I had to reach out to get that answer. So another question I got was from actually one of the people in our TDMM study group. We have one person here tonight who's in our TDMM study group, but I got an email from somebody else in the TDMM study group. We meet every Tuesday night. We're working our way through the TDMM, and we are currently in week 8. So we are just getting through the horizontal cabling section, right? So he shot me a message, and it was from John Johnson from California, by the way. And again, I'm paraphrasing his question because I didn't have enough time to write all this stuff down because class went late today. And basically, he said his question is, he has something that's confusing, and he hoped that I can provide him some clarification. He said he was working on a project, and most of the cable pathways are via underground conduit going straight from the telecom room to the drops. Do they need OSP cabling, or will plenum cable be okay? So what he's talking about there is a wet location. Actually, the NEC classifies 3 locations. You have a dry location, a damp location, and a wet location. So a dry location, in case you didn't know this, is where you inside of the building. Inside of a building where you're not going to expect any kind of water intrusion. In that case, you don't have to really worry about anything. A damp location would be where it's considered a dry location most of the time, but there might be some water that might seep into it and get into the system. For example, new construction, right? New construction, they're building the building. They got the floors built, but they don't have the exterior walls on yet. That would be considered a damp location, because normally it's going to be a dry location, but right now it's kind of a damp location. So then what does wet location mean? So wet location, I had to refer to the code book for this because I want to make sure my answer was specific to him, right? So first you got to go to Article 100 and look up locations, comma, damp. Locations, comma, damp. So if you didn't know this, the code book has a dictionary section inside of it. In case you know that. It's Article 100. So I'll just flip over to locations and I'll read you exactly what it says for wet. And this is right out of the code book. Of course, I got my safety glasses on, so in case this post-it note doesn't jump off the page and give me a paper cut in the eye. So I'm covered there. So it says locations, comma, wet, right? So what it says is installations underground or in concrete slabs or masonry in direct contact with the earth. Boom, there you go. That is considered a wet location. So what does that really mean? So when you actually look at buildings and what we're doing, if you run that cable in the concrete or the conduit in the concrete, or you run it into the ground under the concrete, when that concrete's laying right on the earth, concrete absorbs moisture from the earth. So if it rains where you live, if it snows where you live, and then that snow melts, well, the ground's going to get wet. The concrete's going to absorb that moisture, and then it will condensate that moisture in the conduit. So even though your conduit's inside the building, your cable can get wet. That's a problem. That's a problem. So as we already read in the code book, it defines that as a wet location, a wet location. In NEC Article 300.5, paragraph B, when it talks about cabling in wet locations. Now, you probably think, well, Chuck, only Article 800 applies to me. Wrong, 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 wrong. Article 800 is for the service provider, not for us. We fall under Article 725. I got another interesting interview lined up with Tim. Oh, can't remember his last name. Oh, it just went right out of my head. He wrote an article years back. He's an engineer, and he is, when I have code questions, I go to him. As a matter of fact, we did this just for the study group that we just had. We were talking about power over Ethernet a couple weeks back, and I told them about the table 725.144, which talks about, hey, if your cables, this is the bundle size for power Ethernet for 24 gauge cable and stuff like that. Well, I didn't realize they changed it from the 2017 to the 2020 code book, so I had to call up Tim and said, Tim, I'm having problems with reading this new table. So he helped me through the table. So he is an expert's expert when it comes to reading that stuff. So I'm going to have him on the show, and we're going to talk about 725 versus Article 800. So in Article 310, Article 350, paragraph B, it says, under wet locations, the interior of enclosures or raceways installed underground shall be considered to be a wet location. Insulated conductors and cables installed in those enclosures or raceways and underground installations shall be listed for use as wet locations and shall comply with 310.10 paragraph C. 310.10 paragraph C. 310.10 paragraph C. If you read 310.10 paragraph C, it just means it says that cable's got to be listed for that use. So if you look up plenum cable, if you look up riser rated cable, it's not listed to be used in wet locations. It's listed to be put inside of the building where it's a dry environment. The cable jacket is porous, so water can get into the cable. If water gets into the cable, that's going to cause insertion loss or attenuation, right? It's going to cause you all kinds of problems. Now, the problem is most electrical inspectors, most authorities having jurisdiction, they're not going to bust your chops if you use plenum cable in a conduit inside of a conduit that's inside the concrete because they don't care. It's not really the concern. But you should care. You should care because it's going to affect the cable. When I used to work for a large cable company that served the whole United States, it was for a while they may still be, but when I worked for them, they were the largest privately owned communications company in the United States. And we did a project in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Well, actually, it was a suburb of Philly. I don't remember which suburb, but it was a 4-story building, and all of the cables on the first floor were run through cable chases in the concrete slab that was on direct contact with the earth. Well, that's considered a wet location. Well, guess what? It snows in Philly. We did the project in the wintertime. When the snow melted, the ground got wet. The ground got wet. The moisture got into the concrete because it absorbs moisture from the earth. And then that condensated into the duct bank system. All the cables literally turned to black and quit working. We had to replace all of them. So as responsible designers, as responsible installers, you better consider that a wet location. And you better use what's called industrial grade cable. What they're really talking about there is cable listed for wet locations, outside plant cable or indoor-outdoor cable. Now, generally, when you do that slab on grade construction, you got that conduit in that concrete slab, they generally do what's called a stub up or a stub out. So what that means is the conduit will run from the location on the floor through the conduit, or through the concrete, and then it's going to go up the wall, and then it's going to stop when it comes out of the wall. Okay, that's a stub up. And then a stub out has the curve on the end of it. So as soon as that outside plant cable, as soon as that flooded cable comes out of that rule that's going to apply to you, and that's called the 50 foot. Within 50 feet, you got to change it over to a listed cable for that environment, plenum or riser rated cabling. So the answer to your question, John, is you better be using flooded cable. Okay. Now you only have to worry about this with that first floor, because the second floor, that concrete slab is not in direct contact with the earth. It's only that first one where it's in direct contact with the earth. Now, in some areas of the southeast, like Arizona and New Mexico, because it's so dry and so arid, when they drive a ground electrode into the ground, because it's so dry, they can't get a good enough connection to it that when they test it, it'll pass either code or standards. So a lot of times what they'll do is they'll use what's called a concrete encased electrode. They'll buy the concrete encased electrode. It's just an electrode that's already in concrete. They'll bury that whole assembly in the ground. And because it's in concrete and concrete absorbs what little moisture there is in the desert, it gives it a better connection to the earth, which lowers that reading, right? To get them below that 25 ohms or 10 ohms, because a lot of the equipment manufacturers are going to require 10 ohms or less. So yeah, that's pretty important. So there's a lot of confusion about that, about wet locations and what's actually required. So I hope you got that. Got a question come in. This question is from Fernando. It says, I'm kind of stuck with the next step in my career. Most part of my experience is related with cabling and telecom infrastructure. However, I would like to take the DC-DC instead of the RCDD test. Okay. So I'm not sure what your question there is, Fernando. So I hear what you're saying. You don't want to be a cable puller anymore. I understand that. I will forewarn you this, because I did take a data center class last year, right? When you take the data center class, there's so much stuff in there that you don't get exposed to when you're doing cabling, that to me, it seemed like every page was brand spanking new information. And let's be honest, I'm not a spring chicken. So when I was reading that stuff, it was painful to me. It really was. But if you're doing data center, you're still going to be dealing with cabling. You'll still be dealing with cabling because you're going to be, coordinating with contractors to put in the cabling, troubleshooting, stuff like that. So if you're asking me the career pathway to get that DC-DC certification, I recommend, especially since you didn't really say in your question there, that you take every data center class that Bixby has. Start off with the very first one and work your way through it until you get through all of those. Get the book, read it, study it, memorize it, and then take the test. Okay, it's because it's as complicated, if not more complicated, as the cabling industry is. Aaron says, underground. I'm not sure what you mean by that, Aaron. You have to clarify that for me. Let me know what you were kind of talking about there. So yeah, the data center class is definitely good stuff. So then the next question I got was from Georgia. And it says, Chuck, the electricians cut some of our voice cables. Is it okay to use Scotch locks? Oh, for those who don't know what a Scotch lock is, And it's that little round circle thing with the red thing. You stick your cables in, and then another cable, and you squeeze in a little icky pig gel comes out of it and stuff. No. Replace the cable. I would only use the Scotch lock. if it's an analog phone, and I would only use the Scotch lock if it was only temporary until I can go back and get the right stuff to come back to fix it. I would not leave it with that Scotch lock on there, okay? Because that could cause you all kinds of problem. So Shasi says, is there a distance standard for handholds and manholes for outside plant? Well, they don't call them manholes, Shotzi. They call them maintenance holes now. And I just saw that number. Today. Oh, man, my mind's pulling a blank. I will find out for you. And I will take care of that answer for you. Actually, we have a call later tonight, Shotzi. Hopefully I can get it before that call. And I just saw that number. Is it 300 feet? Or is it? I'll find it for you. I just come across. I don't do much outside plant, but there is a distance for that, right? And then the next question comes from Iowa. It says, Chuck, we are running some outside plant cable in a campus environment. I noticed that some of the cables have what appears to be an air valve on it, like the ones on the tires for my truck. What the heck is that? Well, that valve is called a Schrader valve, and that cable is called a pressurized cable. So pressurized cable, when it comes to outside plant cable, the whole key is two important things. One, keep rodents out of it, keep moisture out of it, right? So they keep rodents out of it by using that corrugated tin. Unfortunately, they still chew through it, but it slows them down. And then also you want to keep the moisture out of it. And you also want to protect it against the elements, so the temperature changes, stuff like that. You can protect it from moisture from this thing called Icky Pick. Now, Icky Pick is a gel-like kind of material that they put inside the cable. Icky Pick, by the way, is the worst stuff in the world to try to take off a cable. Even if they got cleaners specifically for Icky Pick, and one of them is like a citrus type of cleaner. Even if you use that, it's still a pain in the neck to get that off. It really is. So that's one way that they use. By the way, Icky Pick used to be flammable. I don't know if it still is or not anymore, but it used to be flammable. Another way they can use what's called a pressurized cable. So they'll put a Schrader valve on that cable, and then they'll seal it off, and then they pump either dry air, not regular air, because regular air has moisture in it. So it's got to be. They actually strip the moisture out of that air, or they'll put pressurized gas, and they'll pressurize it. Now, because the cable's pressurized, it keeps the moisture from getting inside of it. The problem with pressurized systems is somebody's got to monitor that pressure, right? Let me ask you this. When was the last time you checked the air pressure in the tires of your truck? Or let me rephrase that question. How often should you be checking the tire pressures on your truck? Daily. But in reality, how often do you do it, right? Now, they do make some monitoring systems that you can attach to the outside plant cable that monitors the air pressure. And those systems, they can be set up to a computer where it would actually send either an emergency text alert or emergency email to who's ever responsible for maintaining that cable plant. And they'll tell them, hey, look, there's a problem and you need to come fix that. The issue is those systems aren't cheap. They're not cheap. And that's going to require someone to maintain it and someone to be aware of that all the time. What if that person's on vacation? So you got to think about who's going to take over while you're not there. So very good, Mark. That is considered a butt splice. Very good. You get the winner chicken dinner, because now people don't know that's considered a butt splice. Very good. So that was the last written question. Goo gone. Is that what you use, Shotzi? That was the last written question I have. It's 6:27. I do have time for one more question. If you have one. This next episode, I'll give you a couple minutes to type it in. The next episode, I'm doing an interview on Monday with someone who took their A+ certification. So I'm going to talk to him about that whole process and what he thought of it and how's it impacted his career. And then after that, I got another interview lined up with Hallie. Can't think of her last name. She is brand new to the industry. She works for America Insultech, and she is new to fiber. So I want to talk to her about what's her views on somebody brand new to this industry, and also what's her view on this industry for as a female coming into this industry. Let's be honest, our industry is male dominated. There's more and more females in our industry, but it's still a male dominated field. So and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of successful women in this industry. So there you go. So Mark says he's working on his Network Plus. Very cool. Very cool. I'm an old cable dog. I've always done cable certifications. I've never done computers. Computers give me headaches. They just do. I want them to work. I don't care. If they don't work, then I have problems. But very cool. I always have a high respect for people who can do software and programming and stuff like that. So I haven't gotten any questions coming in. So I got 6:28 here. So I'll give you another few seconds or going on. While we're waiting, show content. Is there a subject matter that you want me to do a future episode on the podcast? Or you want me to interview? I forgot to mention, I got another interview lined up with Christopher Hobbs from Big C. He's the training services manager. So we're going to be talking about the Big C training program. So I look forward to that. I just shot him over the questions, and we just got to negotiate a date and a time to actually do that interview. So that'll be another cool interview. So I got lots of cool interviews lined up. So, Aaron, question. So Aaron says, I got a few questions. What's the most stressful experience? Oh, you shot me this question before, Aaron. I'm sorry, I forgot to apologize. What's the most stressful experience you had working in the data world? To me, the most stressful experience I had, we did a project for MCI WorldCom in Memphis, Tennessee. And it was a call center, and it had, I want to say 650 drops. Each drop was a quad. So you do the math, that's what, 2,400 cables. Everything went fine and dandy. We terminated cables. We tested the cables, and they were coming out to do the cutover and the content. And this wasn't the first MCI WorldCom that our company did. It was just the first one that I did. And so we get out there, and the IT guy gets out there, and he starts plugging in equipment, and he realized that all of our jacks were wired T568B. And in the scope of work, they were supposed to be T568A. Now, at this point, I already released most of my crew. So I was in pure panic mode because I'm thinking, oh my God, there's 2,400 jacks that we got to pull off modular furniture faceplates, re-terminate, and retest. You just added another 3 weeks to this project. That's the reason I'm bald on the top of my head, was because of that project. But luckily, I talked to the customer, and I had a good working relationship with them, because even though that was the first project I ran, it was not the first time I dealt with him, because I used to estimate projects for him. And because of my working relationship with him, I was able to get him to say, okay, well, don't worry about changing the jacks. We'll just flip the cross connects in the field. Future call centers, please do them correctly. So I guess the lesson learned there is read your scope of work, read your contracts carefully. Read them carefully. Read them 2 times, 3 times, 5 times, 10 times, however long it takes. Because if he really wanted to, he could have really pushed me and said, you need to change all these jacks. And I would have called my boss, have everybody come back, re-terminate, retest, and I probably would have lost my job. So, the funny thing is, we never learn from doing things right, do we? We learn from mistakes, right? We learn from mistakes. So he has on, have you ever had a worst case scenario happen? Did you plan for such things? Now, I didn't plan for it, but I did learn afterwards. Again, what I did learn from that lesson is I learned to, no, it wasn't military, it wasn't the government. It was actually that's the way they wanted their stuff. It's one of them weird private customers that wanted that wiring scheme. So I learned from that lesson to make sure that I read through my scope of work. And then not only did I read at the beginning of the project, that I would make sure that at least once a week, especially on my larger project, I would always read through the scope of work. That way, always reading, it's always in my head. So that was the lesson learned. I learned from there, right? Okay, he's working on a cabling renovation for a bank right now, and keeping the internet service on is critical to his business. Yes, it is. And so is law firms. Ask me how I know that one. Yeah. The ideal that the system could go down because of something I do puts healthy fear in you, as well it should, even though I know it's not a likely thing to happen. Okay, so I'm going to make some assumptions here, Aaron. I'm assuming that you're the point of contact between you and the bank, right? So what I would do is I would ask for a meeting with the customer, and I would sit down and say, look, I want to do some risk mitigation. This is part of project management, risk mitigation. And just say, look, let's run through some scenarios. If this happens, what do we expect? And come up with a plan ahead of time. Now, be forewarned that even if you come up with a plan, when push comes to shove, when the proverbial goat feces hits the fan, things are going to change and won't do exactly the way you planned. But if you think about it in advance, you're being proactive instead of reactive. And then get it in writing, right? So once you come up with this risk mitigation and go through a flow chart on who should be contacted and stuff like that, write it all up. You sign it, they sign it, and then that way there's a document that says here's what you're going to handle. It's okay to talk about risk mitigation, and from the customer's perspective, they're going to read that and they're going to say, "This guy's actually thinking about what ifs." Because there's a lot of cable contractors, there's a lot of project managers, there's a lot of technicians out there that don't think about that. I'm glad that you are thinking about that. I really, really am. And like I said, just sit down and do research on risk mitigation plans, project management, risk mitigation plans. And that'll help you come up with those kinds of plans, which will help alleviate those kinds of issues. And then that way, even if something does go wrong, they're going to be more likely to work with you, less likely to hit you with any liquidated back charges because you were proactive and you thought about this in advance. And I mentioned about law firms, right? My brother and I used to do work at a law firm in downtown DC called Hogan and Hartson. Hogan and Hartson is in the top 10 law firms in size in the United States, not DC, the United States. So they're a huge law firm. We were pulling cable underneath their access floor. And the IT people at Hogan and Hartson back then, I can't speak for them now because we're talking 30 years ago, they weren't really detail oriented. They would just lift tiles, drop cable in, and then close tiles. And so you'd open up tile and it'd be like a rat's nest underneath there. So my brother and I were running a cable in this data center. And we ran the cable, and my brother was using a 1/4-inch fish tape because the 1/8-inch fish tape literally would not push through this rat's nest. So he's using a 1/4-inch fish tape and he pushes through it and he disconnects a DS3 connection. Hogan Hartson is the DC office is the central hub for all the other offices. So if the DC office goes down, all Hogan Hartson locations throughout the United States goes down. Yes. He knocked them all down. So we got him back up and running. I'm in the truck. I'm driving back to the office. And I'm pull the truck in the office. I tell my brother to unload all the stuff. I go up to tell my boss what happened because this is back before cell phones. All I had was a pager. And I walked in. He was in there, and he says, "So tell me about what happened." So he'd already talked to the customer. And I told him what happened. And he says, "Well, look, I understand mistakes can happen, but the customer wants a scapegoat." I had to fire my own brother. So I went back down, and I told my brother, I said, "I got some bad news." And he looks at me and goes, "I'm fired, ain't I?" Yep. He's still in communications. He's still doing really good. He works for a company called Vision Technologies in DC. If you're in the area, Vision Technologies is a superb company to work for. Superb company. They got a really good trainer. His name is Kirk. Really good company. Really good company. So I hope that answered your question, Aaron. If it didn't, let me know. I'll give you my phone number and we can have a conversation. Or if you want, I got a call scheduled with it's generally my cable dog group, the people who support me via Patreon. But if you want, I can give you the link for tonight's episode and you can log on. We can talk more about it there. But if not, there you go. So we are past 30 minutes, 36 minutes. Holy cow. So that does it for tonight's episode. If you have any other questions, make sure that you send them to us for next Thursday night's class or next Thursday night's live Q&A session. And hopefully I won't be late for that one. So take care, everybody, and be safe.